Hi there, my name is Carl Irwin. I am a blue coat. I marched in an era between two eras that we're going to look at today. About somewhere between 15 to 20 years ago, I was on the field doing my blue coat thing. So I have a little bit of experience about what we're going to talk about, and I can speak to it at least on an experiential level, having been there on a field and know what this sort of stuff looks like and how it is performed and how it is played. I was a mellophone player, and we're going to talk a lot about mellophones here as we get into this discussion. And we're going to do something unorthodox and unholy today. We are going to directly compare eras of drum and bugle corps and try to sort out some of the arguments that are made today and at least rationalize the validity or the lack of validity to those arguments by doing a direct comparison. We're going to look at Star of Indiana 1991 Roman images, and we're going to compare that with Blue Devils 2014 Fellini-esque, the very best of yesteryear with the very best of today. And we're going to draw some comparisons. And I think you could do this fairly faithfully by comparing any one of the great shows of that time period back in the early to mid-90s with any one of the great shows today in the late second decade of the 2000s that we're in right now. So just a few points to make as we make this comparison, just a few things to consider as we go into it. The arguments that are made is that drum corps today stand around and play. And that the visuals are not nearly as complex as they were back then, that they are cheating the system, that certainly they play hard stuff, but when they play the hard stuff, they're not moving. And the implication of that is that back in the day when they played the hard stuff, Dad Nabbit, they were moving when they were playing. It's a lot softer these days on that line. Additionally, I think part of the argument is that the visuals were better back in the day. The George Zingali era of drill writing was better visually than the visuals of today. And some of the things that they did back then, they don't do anymore. They stopped doing that, and there's a lot of scattered drill and ambiguous, unreadable forms. And we're going to see if that's true or not. By direct comparison, is the drill that's happening in shows today comparable to the drill that was happening back in the day? Is it as difficult? Are they doing it? If they're doing it, are they doing it as much? Or are they doing it less? Or are they actually doing more of it? Is that possible? Are they actually doing some of that stuff on a higher equity today than they were back then? Is there more of it happening now than back then? And I think you may be surprised at what we find. So let's get into the comparisons. And again, this is just for direct comparison because the argument is usually very vague. It's usually happening in internet chat forums, and the comparisons lack direct comparison. We're going to do it right now. We're going to actually look at these shows together and talk about them. A few differences to note. The horns are different. We're playing in G in 91. We're playing in B flat and F in the late 2000s. I don't think that really matters. It does change what we call the tessitura of the instrument, meaning that it is a little bit different between the instruments, that the harmonic series has moved up a minor third today than from where it was in the past. And that has some implications for fingerings on some harder passages. In general, if you move the harder passages up in the higher register on the G instruments, you're dealing with fewer valves. You're dealing with just one or two valves, particularly on the ostinato patterns that may happen. Whereas on B flat, that tessitura is a little bit different. It's a higher range in the harmonic series, meaning that playing the same register of notes means that you're incorporating a slightly more difficult combination of valves. So it's actually a little bit more difficult, I think, to play some of these harder passages today than it was back then because of the range and what the valve combinations did for you. Part of that had to do with the fact that valves were previous to the 3-valve G instruments were only 2 valves, and that's why it was a lower register, because you were able to play a full chromatic scale using just a couple of valves in that register, in the register of G. So that's one of the reasons why it's a little bit more accessible, I think, at that time. So keep that in mind. Also, we're going to look at the equity of playing. Is it a shared equity or is it inequitable? Who's playing what? When are they playing it? What is the drill doing when they're playing? We're going to take a very honest look at Star of Indiana 1991 and see if we can draw comparisons to the equity of what they're doing in the drill and in the playing to what we see today in the late 2000s. So, given all of that, let's get into it, and let's enjoy some Drumcorps together with a little bit of commentary throughout, discuss what we're doing. So I hope you enjoy this time. I invite you to grab a cup of coffee, maybe hit pause right now so you can sit back, a cup of coffee, a bag of potato chips, something that you can sort of occupy yourself with, because it's going to take a little bit of time here to watch these two shows together back to back and have this commentary together. Star of Indiana, Roman Images, 1991, George Zingali, drill. Segregated responsibility to the mid-instruments, mellophones, flugelhorns if they have them. Just be honest, a couple cracks in there in the line. It's not the most perfect performance. This is the finals performance. Linear drill, long visual phrase, so a large number of beats between one set and the other with unidirectional movement. That's a lot more accessible to do than having a large number of direction changes or subsets. Sustained chords for the most part, sustained playing, ostinatos in the midline for complexity. The same repeated line over and over again and a high tessitura on the instrument means that there's fewer vowels. This right here is the hardest thing that they do in their whole show. And you can see they're working hard to do it. There's a little bit of discrepancy in the form. Very difficult to do a box rotation like that. High velocity on that drill move right there, visually, but actually a segregated responsibility. There's an inequity in the responsibility. Some people have to move faster than others, so you have a limited responsibility to about 20, 30 people, about half of the group, and then the rest of the group is taking small step sizes to get where they need to be in that pinwheeling. Excellent form control on this. This is really where they get their point value, is that they just really execute very beautifully. High velocity drill, but nobody's playing, right? Some of those ostinatos creep in the sopranos in the midline. Backfield. Repeated patterns, high tessitura. That means a low number of valves. Only one or two valves being used. Makes it very accessible. Repeated line. Mellophones are staged front and center here on a very low velocity drill. Low responsibility and form guiding to play that melody. Repeated phrase, very accessible playing. Contrabass is staged front and center for that lick. Low responsibility in the drill. They're moving, but they don't, they might as well be standing still. They're moving one. It's like playing in a parade. Trumpets stop to play that fanfare. Mellophones stop to play the fanfare, and then the final hit. So they're stopping for crucial moments, just like they do today. The assumption is that they didn't do that back in the day, but they did. That's how you're supposed to do it. Da-da-da, 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 da-da-da. Repeated syncopated pattern. Very accessible upper tessitura of the instrument. Low number of vowels being used. Percussion feature. They're staged well together over here. Low responsibility in the drill for that fanfare part in the sopranos. Low velocity in the drill. Repeated ostinato pattern in the midline again. Here it comes again. It's the exact same combination of valves over and over. Same thing. It's 2 beats long. 4 beats long on this ostinato pattern. There's the line in the midline. And they were staged well in the front at that point. Ostinato pattern. That was difficult. No doubt about it. That was difficult. Even though they're playing a low-level responsibility ostinato pattern, a repeating pattern, and a high tessitura on the instrument, rather high level for the tessitura of the instrument, I guess is the way I should say. They're playing a low combination of valves, only 1 or 2 valves being used in that. That's difficult to do at that velocity and keep that together. They did a very good job with it. So things are going to slow down now. When you think about this show, you think about 2 big moments, the one we just passed and the one at the end. And normally you take those 20 seconds in the middle and the 20 seconds at the end and you combine them together and then you create this umbrella for the whole show. It's kind of an unfair way to look at it because it's just two moments in the show that don't take up a lot of time. Note here that there's a low number of sets. They're not moving a whole lot. There's a low level of movement. On the player level, on the performer level, you're staying within kind of the space of 2 yard lines and within the area front to back of around the front hash to back hash. That's a very low level of space to be carrying around. Some of the hardest playing they've done was right there, and they were standing still for it. To play that in the low range on the instrument, play it together, play it clean. And they made them stationary to do it, because that's how you do this stuff. Repeated phrase. Right? That's just typical of this type of music, and it makes it accessible to them. High level of responsibility for the mellophones, and they put them stationary to do it, because that's how you do it. They're standing still to play that line. Same exact music in the same key, same valve combinations, repeated phrases, very accessible. Great visual moment, high velocity drill, but nobody's really playing. Hits, rhythmic hits, very accessible music for the visual. Low responsibility on the front of the form, high responsibility in the back, higher velocity. Short bursts of music, very accessible. Mellophones are really hauling it right now. They're playing quite a bit, that midline. And I'm not sure where they're at in the drill right now, but again, large number of beats between sets means that you have unidirectional movement. It's a lot easier to play in that kind of situation. Great drill moment. high velocity motion, but nobody's playing. They're at carriage right now. The horns are down. Percussion feature. They're playing down front here. They are moving, but they're moving at a snail's pace, so they might as well be standing still. It's just in the interest of keeping the visual aesthetic moving. They are moving at a very, very small step interval backfield. And the winds finally slowed down here. Horns up. The velocity slows down immediately, and they start to play. So when the velocity is high, don't play, right? That's what they did back then. That's what they do today. No different. Same stuff. Unidirectional movement on that drill move. Facing. Responsibility is segregated to the midline again. The mellophones, flugelhorns, if they have them, they're carrying most of the load. On the beat, ... accessible. This is the second part that people think about when you think about this show. A lot of pinwheeling coming up here in the drill. Great inequity in the drill. Some people are not moving a great deal. Others are moving quite a bit. Not a lot of pass-throughs happening. One big one right there. Mostly groups are moving around the others. Excellent, very, very nice visual moment there, and that's the type of drill that Zingale was known for, that he did with the cadets. A lot of that kind of stuff. Note that nobody's really moving a great distance in that. The contrabasses, I think, are in the back here. They move about 20 yards together as a group. They break the form down from the cross that was on the side 1 over to the side 2, and they move about 20 yards across the field to get there. And there's not a lot of playing going on. The playing is very, very accessible when they pull that off. That's how you do big drill moves. You get the playing out of the way so that you can accomplish it. So very, very, very well done, iconic performance there. And I hope you're able to rationalize a little bit more so that you can understand what the responsibilities are and how they're able to finagle it to make it work so that it comes across more impactful than it necessarily really is at times. That's the goal, to make it really impactful on the audience and the GE level, that general effect level, but still keeping it very accessible for the membership so that they can do it well. So let's take a look at another show here for comparison. This is the Blue Devils 2014 Fellini-esque. We're going to compare the very best of yesteryear with the very best of today. This is what Drumcorps shows look like today. For comparison, you'll note that the show is a little bit longer by a couple minutes, a little bit more time into the shows these days than back then. Some electronica, very esoteric stuff that people criticize today. A lot of this unreadable scatter drill leading to a readable form. And nobody's playing, right? This is solo. Typical velocity drill. They are playing and they are moving. Repeated pattern, but it's tongued. Fanfare. Chromatically changing music. Playing on the move. Chromatically changing fanfare. Okay, so for all the standing still and playing that they're doing, they're actually moving quite a bit, and it's chromatically changing. So we have a higher level of musicality going on in this material than what we have to compare to from 91. They stop to play that fanfare because that's what you do. We're on B flat instruments 2. The harmonic series of the instrument is moved up a minor third. So to reach a tessitura where we're not using the third valve, to reach a range in the tessitura where we're not using the third valve, you have to go up a minor third higher than you do on the G instruments. So a lot more use of that third valve in the music of this period. Very three-dimensional drill movement for percussion these days compared to the early and mid-90s. They are playing and moving, even step size. High velocity drill, and they're playing. Sustained chords. Trumpets and mellophones are dealing with it. Notice the box rotation in there. So already they've surpassed in performance the drill, box rotation drill of 91, just in the first few minutes here. They're doing the same stuff at a bit of a higher level with the playing and the moving at the same time. These kids are older. They're music majors. These kids are very experienced, playing at their prime. Everything stops for effect. Great solo here. Some ballad stuff here. Very comparable to the ballad stuff from 91. There are greater shared responsibilities in the music in this show than in 91. Just comparing show to show. More instruments are playing with responsibility in the music here than in the Respighi arrangement. Low velocity drill. They're not playing. This is but now they're playing. And they stopped for that. Note that the entire group had to play that lick. It wasn't segregated to one section. And they stopped for it. That's what you do. A lot of linear drill. This looks a lot like 91 when you think about the linear lineup. Trumpets segregated out for their fanfare and their line. These guys are doing some difficult stuff and they're playing at the same time. Low brass carrying the load. Blue Devils doing what they do. High velocity movement here, and the playing cuts out. And they stop. And they start playing when they start moving. segregated parts so the trumpets get out of the way there to play that lick. No ostinato patterns really in the show. That's not a trick that they're relying on. Small group down here carrying the load, and they're doing all this dance motion. That's a little tricky. That's not easy to do. Fun moment there. Very cool drill visual moment. They're playing hits on it. It's reasonably accessible music for what they're doing, but I think it's a level different from what we were looking at in '91. There's another box rotation, and they do it very, very well. So again, hardest stuff to do is right there, and we've already done it half a dozen times more than what you saw in '91 on a drill level. I don't know, guys, there's an awful lot of drill in this show, and this is pretty comparable to what we see today. There's more box rotation, very clean. I'd just like to point out that the whole brass section played that lick, and they played it on the move. They didn't stop for that. They played it while they were moving. And it wasn't segregated to one voice. Everybody was in on it. High velocity pinwheeling going on there. Very similar to what we see in the George Segali drill. They're doing it too. Big front ensemble feature. Very clean drill execution for the brass and percussion. Ensemble feature, high velocity drill, no playing responsibilities. Ballad playing but high velocity drill. Playing with high velocity drill. That is the track movement that the Blue Devils are known for since 2001. Tank track movement. Closing out the show, big impact movement. The form disintegrates and then comes back together. Very easy to do. Low-level responsibilities in playing, a lot of sustained chords. Very simple drill idea that gets a big payoff. A at the very end there. There it is. So, a comparison very quickly. You're seeing the same drill here as you saw in 91. They're doing the same things. They have about the same amount of linear drill going on for time. What we're seeing a little bit more of, though, is box rotation and contrary motion. That's something that came out more in the 2000s. The addition of contrary motion to drill rather than linear form. And that's a different aesthetic than what we saw back in the early to mid-90s, where it was a lot more linear, a lot more pinwheeling going on. Do we see the same pinwheeling kind of drill that we saw from George Zingali in the 90s here? Yes, we see it. We see it all over the place. They're doing the same thing at the same level of difficulty with the same level of responsibility in the drill, the same level of responsibility in the playing. Let's talk about the playing a little bit. This music is significantly more chromatic. Since the change to B flat, the music across chorus has gotten considerably more chromatic, meaning that we're not hearing music in the same tonal center, drum corps to drum corps to drum corps. They're venturing off into chromatic changes in the tonality. We're playing a lot of different keys, a lot of different key signatures, and sometimes it changes fluidly as they're playing. So the level of music is considerably more difficult today than it was back then on the G instruments. And again, there's a reason for that. The groups are older and more experienced now, at least in terms of musicianship, than they were at that time. I think that's an objective thing that you can observe in Drumcorps. Do they stop to play fanfares and do they stop to play difficult passages today? Yes. Did they do it back then? You betcha. They did the same thing back then that they do now, because that's what you do. You stop to play those lines. I will note that, at least in this show compared to 91, the responsibilities are considerably more shared in the music than they were back then. Though the music in 91, that Respighi show, focused a lot more on one section, on the mid-level instruments, the mellophones. I think they may have been marching flugelhorns at that time. Now they don't do that. Now they just march trumpets, mellophones, and baritones. I think at this point, they've gotten rid of the euphonium subdivision of the baritone line. It's just one instrument. And then you have, on top of that, the tubas, which would be the contrabass line. And then you have variety in the solos. Occasionally they'll pick up trombones for small ensemble stuff. I don't know if they were using trombones in the show, if they had done that yet in 2014, or if that was something that came a little bit later. I think that showed up in 2016. Was when we started to see that. I may be wrong about that. There may have been some trombones. I want to say that Santa Clara Vanguard featured trombones quite a bit, and they may have trombones on the feature points in here too. But that's where you're getting your diversity in tone, is with the addition of those instruments that are used kind of in very special circumstances, but not all the time. But there's a shared responsibility. When the difficult lines show up, you'll notice in today's drum corps that everybody's playing it. You're getting it all the way through the line. You hear that a lot in the Blue Devils. You hear that a lot in the Blue Coats. You hear that a lot, certainly these days, in Santa Clara Vanguard. And you definitely hear that a lot in Carolina Crown, where you hear shared responsibility. The ostinato pattern trick that you hear back in 91 is employed much more so in Carolina Crown's horn line today. That's something that they do a lot of, where you hear that repeated pattern that gives a lot of kind of audible velocity to what's going on. But it's a really good trick. It's a really good trick to play, where you have a repeated pattern and a high level in the tessitura on the instrument using a small number of valves. So that's the comparison. Is it far off? No. Do they stand around and play in the late 2000s? No, not more than they did back in 91. It's the same stuff. Is the drill easier? No. Is there less of it? No. it's a bogus claim. It just doesn't stand up when you make the comparison. And here we were able to do it 1-to-1. And you can do this with any show. If you look at any championship show of now and compare it to championship shows back then, the comparisons hold up. So I'm glad we were able to do this. Should we hold the 91 Star Show in reverence? Yes, it's a great show. It's incredibly well written. They're doing difficult stuff. But this idea that the good old days were better just doesn't hold up. What we're looking at is a difference in aesthetic. I think when you compare the aesthetics of 91 with the aesthetics of 2014, you're going to find different aesthetics. It's not exactly the same visual aesthetic. Back then, there was a lot more of a linear beauty to what they were doing. Here, you're seeing subgroupings in block formation, different kinds of aesthetic material happening, but certainly the same level of difficulty, and I think it's actually quite a bit higher now than it was then, when you really get down to the objective observations that you can make about the difficulty of what they're doing. So anyway, hopefully I didn't offend too many people. Hopefully we have an appreciation for both of these time periods a little bit more after doing a direct comparison. And again, you can do this with any show. You could look at any contending show now compared to contending shows like back then. You're going to see a lot of similar stuff. So hope you enjoyed this, and hopefully I've used up your time wisely and you were able to enjoy a cup of coffee while watching this. So yeah, I hope you like that. Have a great one.